Dr. Everett Sloane set his coffee cup down on Mara Vesper's lunch tray without asking. Just set it there, ceramic scraping against her plate, like she was furniture, like the tray was his, like she was his. Vesper, his voice carried across the entire cafeteria. Every head turned. The Callaway patient's compression wrap was loose again this morning. Third time this week. Is that the standard you're comfortable with? Because the rest of us have actual medical degrees holding us to a higher one. Mara didn't look up. She kept moving, one hand steadying the heavy tray, her right sinking through its measured gait, the prosthetic foot landing with that faint sound she'd spent 8 years learning to live with. Her jaw was tight. Her eyes stayed down. Sloane followed her 2 more steps, just to make sure everyone heard the next part. Maybe rehabilitation nursing is too demanding. Have you considered something more administrative? Paperwork, filing. Something that doesn't require full mobility. If you were in that room right now, if that were you, what would you do? Subscribe to our channel and follow this story all the way to the end, because what happens next in this cafeteria will change everything you think you know about strength, survival, and the woman they all underestimated. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling us what city or country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels, because it's about to go somewhere none of them expected. The tray was heavier than it looked. Mara had learned years ago not to ask for help carrying things. The moment you asked, people started watching you differently. They started cataloging what you couldn't do, filing it away, pulling it out again on days like this one when they needed something to aim at. So she carried the tray herself, the way she always did, her knuckles white against the plastic edge, the cafeteria heat pressing down on her shoulders like a physical weight. Sloane was still behind her. She could hear him breathing his satisfaction. 3 tables of residents had watched the whole exchange. 2 nurses near the beverage station were looking at their shoes. Marcus Webb, the physical therapist who sometimes ate lunch with her, had frozen mid-bite. Nobody said a word. They never did. When Sloane was on a roll, he was senior attending. He had tenure. He had the particular cruelty of a man who had never once suffered the consequences of being publicly unkind. Mara found a corner table and set the tray down carefully. She sat. She looked at the food she no longer wanted. 8 years at Dunmore Veterans Hospital. 8 years of getting up before 6, driving the 40 minutes from her apartment, spending 12-hour shifts coaxing traumatized bodies back towards something functional. She knew her patients by their injuries and their nightmares. She knew which ones woke up swinging and which ones went silent. She knew how to read the specific kind of stillness that meant a man was deciding whether tomorrow was worth it, and she knew how to talk him back from that ledge without making him feel talked to. She was good at this work. She knew she was good at it. That was the thing about Sloane's particular brand of cruelty. It didn't make her doubt her competence. It just made her tired. Bone deep, marrow deep tired. The kind that sleep didn't touch. Picked up her fork. Across the cafeteria, Marcus Webb finally looked up and gave her a small, helpless shrug. Sorry, he mouthed it. She nodded. He wasn't wrong to stay quiet. Told him before that jumping in just made it worse, gave Sloane more material, turned a 1-minute humiliation into a 5-minute production. Pick your battles. She'd said that to a lot of patients over the years. She wasn't always good at her own advice. The fork made it halfway to her mouth before the cafeteria doors opened. Not swung open, not pushed. The doors came apart as though whoever was on the other side had simply decided they would, and the entire architecture of the room shifted in response. Sound died. Movement stopped. The residents who had been laughing at the corner booth went quiet without understanding why, the way animals go quiet before weather changes. 4 men entered first. Dark suits, dark glasses, the specific stillness of people who had been trained to scan a room in under 2 seconds and already had. They fanned left and right without speaking, their eyes moving across exits, across faces, across the angles between windows and doors. Then he walked in. Mara recognized the shape of him before she recognized anything else. The width of his shoulders, the unhurried quality of his movement, the way a man moves when he has never once had to hurry because the world has always waited for him. Charcoal suit, the kind that costs more than 3 months of her salary, cut so precisely it looked like it had been built around him rather than purchased. silver beginning at his temples, a jaw that might have been handsome once, and had become something sterner with age. Lucian Moretti. She knew that name. Everybody in this city knew that name. His photograph appeared in newspapers, the way certain weather patterns did, with a kind of grim regularity that made people brace. He controlled freight operations, labor contracts, import routing, and the kind of political pressure that didn't show up in any campaign finance filing. 3 federal investigations in the past decade. 3 times the cases had collapsed before they reached a jury. He was not a man who came to hospitals unless someone important to him was dying. He swept the room without appearing to look at anything. At his side walked a dog, Belgian Malinois, older, the muzzle grayed, the body still carrying the lean, coiled architecture of serious working stock. The dog moved in perfect formation beside a uniformed handler heel position, eyes forward, the absolute precision of years of professional conditioning. A working dog at the end of its career, still carrying itself like it was in its prime. The room held its breath. Then the dog stopped. It happened so fast that Mara didn't fully process it in real time. 1 second, the animal was moving in formation, every muscle discipline, every step measured. The next second, it had gone rigid, its head snapping sideways, nose lifting, nostrils working at something invisible. The handler said something sharp and low. The dog didn't respond. Its entire body was trembling. Not the trembling of aggression, not the trembling of fear. Something else, something raw, something that looked like a living body trying to reconcile something it had been told was impossible. And then the dog broke. It didn't bark. It didn't growl. It simply turned and ran, tearing across the cafeteria with a kind of desperate single-mindedness that scattered chairs and sent a tray clattering from a table. The handler's command lost behind it. Lucian Morty's entire security detail suddenly in motion reaching for holsters. The dog hit Mara. Not hard, not aggressively. It crashed against her legs and went low, pressing its head into her lap, with a full body trembling that rattled the chair she was sitting in. The sound it made was somewhere between a whine and a cry, something she'd never heard from a trained animal in her life. It pressed harder, its grayed muzzle burrowing against her thigh, shaking like it had been cold for years, and had finally found something warm. Mara's fork hit the table. Her hand found the dog's head before she'd made any conscious decision to move it. "Rook," she said, very quietly. The name came out of someplace she'd sealed a long time ago. The dog pressed harder. Across the cafeteria, Lucian Moretti had gone completely, absolutely, dangerously still. His security team had moved to intercept, hands out, voices professional, sir, the dog. But he stopped them with one movement of 2 fingers. Just that. 2 fingers raised slightly, and every one of them froze. He was staring at Mara. She was not looking at him. She was looking at the dog in her lap, both hands, in the animal's fur, her eyes doing something she hadn't let them do in a very long time. Rook's tail was moving now, wild and undignified, everything the training had stripped away, coming apart in one collapsed moment. Rook. His voice, when it crossed the cafeteria, carried the exact texture she remembered. Low, controlled, with something underneath the control that most people probably never heard. Heel. The dog lifted its head. It looked at Lucian. Then it looked back at Mara. It did not move. Lucian walked toward her. Not quickly. He never moved quickly, but with a quality of focus that made the other 40 people in the cafeteria feel like they had stopped existing. He stopped 3 feet from her table. She made herself look up. His face had aged the way she'd expected, heavier in the jaw, sharper around the eyes, the lines deeper. He'd been 41 the last time she'd seen him. He was 53 now. He looked like a man who had spent those 12 years doing exactly what his reputation said he'd been doing, which was accumulating power and spending very little of it on sleep. His eyes were the same color they'd always been. Dark gray, nearly charcoal, the kind that could look calm the moment before something violent happened. He was looking at her like he wasn't entirely certain she was real. She understood the feeling. "Hello, Lucian," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she had any right to expect. He didn't say anything for a moment. His jaw worked once. Silas Creed, his chief bodyguard, had materialized 6 feet to his left, massive, bald, carrying the kind of controlled menace that came from 20 years of professional violence, and was watching the room with the patient alertness of someone who had decided nothing in it was a threat, but was willing to be corrected. "You're a nurse," Lucian said. It was not quite a question. It was the specific flatness of a man trying to put a fact into a world where the fact refused to fit. Rehabilitation. She glanced down at Rook, who had not moved from her lap. 8 years. Lucian looked at the dog. Something moved through his face that he didn't bother hiding, which was unusual for him. She'd watched him control entire rooms without letting anyone read a single thought. Whatever was happening to his expression right now was something he had lost control of. "Everyone said you were dead," he said. "I know. I had people looking. I know that too." A muscle worked in his jaw. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. His security team visibly adjusted, half of them moving to better positions. Silas Creed repositioning in a way that felt choreographed, and probably was. Lucian Moretti sitting uninvited at a cafeteria table in a veterans' hospital in the middle of the lunch rush was clearly not in anyone's briefing. "Why?" he asked. It was a single word carrying 12 years of compound interest. Mara looked at Rook. The dog had quieted now, still pressed against her, still trembling faintly, but the frantic quality had settled into something exhausted and relieved. She scratched behind his ear, the spot she'd always used. He exhaled in a long shudder. "Because I needed to be someone else for a while," she said. 12 years is a long while. It was a heavy while. He looked at her leg. She didn't try to hide it. The scrub pants were standard issue. They draped the same way over the prosthetic as they would over a natural limb. But the angle of her ankle didn't quite match human anatomy, and people who paid attention noticed. Lucian Moretti had spent his entire life paying attention to small details. He'd have noticed immediately. She watched him not say anything about it. "The mountain operation," he said instead. "Yes." He put his hands flat on the table. Large hands, the knuckles of the right one, carrying old scar tissue she recognized. He'd broken 3 fingers in the mountain and set them himself because there was no alternative at the time. She'd watched him do it. The scar tissue told her he'd never had them properly rebroken and reset. Stubborn. He'd always been stubborn. The shrapnel, he said, wasn't a question. 7 pieces, they got 6. The 7th was too close to the femoral artery. She said it the way she said everything medical, now, flatly factually, with the specific detachment of a woman who had decided a long time ago that her body was a mechanism rather than a source of grief. They took the leg below the knee 6 weeks later. There was an infection. Lucian looked at his hands on the table. "I should have been there," he said. "You were unconscious." After, she shook her head. "After I left. That was my choice." He looked up. "You were still in hospital when you left. I was exactly what I needed to be to make the decision I made." She wasn't unkind about it. She wasn't warm about it either. "I didn't want to go back, Lucian, to any of it. I wanted to be done. And the only way to be done was to disappear completely. From everything? Or from me specifically?" She held his gaze. "From everything that came with you," she said. He absorbed that. He had always been good at absorbing things that were difficult, the way a foundation absorbs weight, not without cost, but without showing the cost to anyone watching. Mara had always thought that was his most dangerous quality. Not his reach, not his resources, not the organized machinery of violence at his disposal. The way he could take a hit and give nothing away. Rook shifted in her lap. She looked down at him, and for a moment the cafeteria noise reasserted itself around them, the clatter of trays. The distant sound of a television, someone laughing 3 tables away. Ordinary sounds. The sounds of a world that had no idea what kind of conversation was happening in its corner. "He's been my dog for 12 years, Lucian said, watching Rook. "Technically. I know. He never acted like it. He was trained to function," she said. "He was trained very well. But training and belonging are different things." Lucian looked at her. The expression on his face was not one she had a word for. It was in the space between anger and grief, and something much older than either. "I thought about what I would say," he told her. "If I ever found you, I had whole conversations, prepared arguments, and," he shook his head, "they all turned out to be the wrong conversation." She opened her mouth to respond, and heard the shot. Not inside the cafeteria, somewhere in the corridor, muffled by walls but unmistakable to anyone who had ever been in a place where shots were fired. The flat, specific crack of a single round. Silas Creed was already moving. Two of Lucian's guards had crossed the cafeteria in 4 steps, hands inside their jackets, not drawing yet but ready. The entire room contracted in that particular way that rooms contract when danger becomes real, the intake of breath, the freeze, the collective delay of civilians trying to understand what they'd just heard. Mara was on her feet. She hadn't planned it. She hadn't consciously decided. She was simply upright, her body making the calculation before her mind finished the question. Rook rising beside her with that same instantaneous response, trained, remembered, precise. Cafeteria erupted. Chairs scraped. Someone knocked a tray, and the sound of it hitting the floor triggered a wave of movement. People diving, people running, someone screaming at the back of the room. The residents at the corner table went flat against the floor. The nurses near the beverage station grabbed each other. Mara's voice came out of her without any of the quiet that usually lived in it. Windows, everyone away from the windows. Left side of the room. Move toward the service corridor. Move now. Help anyone who can't help themselves. Medical staff, stay with your patients. People moved. They just moved. It wasn't that she was shouting, exactly. It was the quality of the direction. Clear, sequential, carrying no trace of doubt. Marcus Webb grabbed 2 wheelchair-bound veterans and started toward the corridor. Charge nurse named Delia, who had been watching Sloane humiliate Mara 40 minutes earlier without saying a word, was now pulling an elderly patient by the hand and following Webb's path without hesitation. 3 orderlies materialized and began moving the most vulnerable patients away from the exterior walls. Sloane had not moved. He was standing behind a support column, face gray, one hand braced against the concrete. Mara looked at him. Dr. Sloane. The tone of her voice was not unkind. It was the tone of someone who needed a body where a body was needed. I have incoming wounded. I need you functional. He stared at her. Now, she said. He pushed away from the column and moved toward the supply alcove, muscle memory taking over from wherever competence lives when fear hasn't completely swamped it. Lucian was at her shoulder. She hadn't heard him move. My people can, he started. Your people will follow Silas and hold the north corridor, she said without looking at him. This wing has 17 post-surgical patients in the rooms above us. The panic will be as dangerous as the shooter. I need your men, controlling traffic, not fighting in a building, full of people who cannot move fast enough to get out of the way. Pause. All right, he said. He turned and spoke to Silas Creed in a low, fast murmur. Creed nodded once and moved, gesturing to the security team with the economical precision of a man who had run more chaotic situations than this one. Mara heard another sound from the corridor. Closer. Running footsteps, then a pause, then a different quality of silence. The specific silence of someone stopping to listen. Rook's head came up. He looked at the service entrance. Mara looked at Lucian. Who knows you're here today? She asked. His jaw tightened. 3 people in my organization. 2 of them are in this room. And the third? The pause that followed was very short and very loud. Before either of them could say anything more, the service door came open. The man who entered was not hospital staff. He was mid-40s, combat built, wearing a jacket that had done the same work that Lucian's suit was doing, concealing what he was carrying. His eyes moved fast across the room, professional fast, finding the security team, finding Lucian, and then landing on him and stopping there with the flat, specific focus of a man who had spent a long time thinking about this exact moment. He had a gun raised, Moretti. His voice was controlled. Barely. The control was the kind that gets built over years of feeding rage into something organized, turning it into purpose, keeping it sharp when grief alone would have let it blunt. There was something destroyed behind his eyes that had been destroyed a long time ago. Silas Creed had a weapon up. 2 of Lucian's guards had angles. The man was holding his position because he'd clearly assessed all of that before he'd opened the door. Get everyone else out, the man said. This is between me and him. Nobody moved. My name is Nolan Rourke, he said, still not shouting. The composure was more frightening than shouting would have been. My brother's name was Cody Rourke. He was 24 years old when he died in Kunar province 12 years ago on Moretti's operation. His eyes didn't move from Lucian. I want to know why, and I want to hear him say it. In the silence that followed, Rook pressed against Mara's leg. She felt the weight of the animal beside her, and the weight of the name Nolan Rourke had just said, and the weight of 12 years collapsing into a single cafeteria moment. She understood with the particular clarity that comes when the thing you've been carrying finally puts down its own mask, exactly what was happening, and exactly what she was going to have to do about it. She stepped forward. "My name is Mara Vesper," she said. "I was there." Nolan Rourke looked at her for the first time. "I was there when Cody died," she said. "And if you want the truth, you're going to have to trust me long enough to hear all of it." The gun didn't waver, but something in his face did, and that was the only crack she needed. Nolan Rourke did not lower the gun, but he stopped moving, and in a room full of armed men, that was the closest thing to a ceasefire Mara was going to get. She held his gaze and did not look at the weapon. Looking at the weapon gave it too much authority. She looked at his face instead, at the place behind his eyes, where 12 years of something corrosive had been living, eating through whatever he'd been before it got hold of him. "You were there," he said. "Not a confirmation. A test. Kunar province, November. The secondary ridge above the valley floor." She let the specificity land. "Your brother was carrying a field radio and a medical pack. He had a Philadelphia Eagles tattoo on his left forearm. He was the third man through the breach." Something moved through Nolan's face. Fast, involuntary, the kind of movement a person makes when a wound gets touched that they thought had scarred over. "You're one of Moretti's people," he said. "I was," Mara said. "I'm not anymore." "You're standing next to him." "I'm standing in front of you," she said. Difference. Silas Creed had not moved. He had the particular quality of a man who had been in rooms like this before and understood that the next 30 seconds would determine whether the next 30 seconds after that were manageable or catastrophic. His weapon was up, his angle was clean, but he was watching Lucian's hand rather than Nolan's gun. Waiting for a signal, Lucian gave him none. He was looking at Mara. She could feel it without turning, could feel the specific quality of his attention, the way his focus landed on her, something concentrated, something that took up physical space. He was watching her work and elaborating something in real time, and not saying a word about it, which meant he was either trusting her judgment or deciding whether to trust her judgment, and the distinction mattered, but she didn't have bandwidth for it right now. "Nolan." She kept her voice level, no performance in it. "There are post-surgical patients above us. Men who came home from the same kind of operations your brother didn't come home from. You fire that weapon in this building, and the shockwave alone could kill someone who had nothing to do with any of this." He knew that. She could see him knowing it. It was in the tightness around his jaw, the way his breathing had shifted since she'd named his brother still controlled. But the control was costing him more now. "I'm not here for them," he said. "I know, but this is where you are." She took one slow step forward. Rook moved with her, the dog's body low and forward, not aggressive, but present a physical fact in the room. "Put it down, and I will tell you everything I know about what happened to Cody. Everything. Not what Moretti wants you to hear. What I saw. Why would you do that? Because I was there, and I've been quiet for 12 years, and I'm tired of what that costs." The gun was still up, but his arm had changed. She could see it in his shoulder, the slight drop in the muscle, the millimeter of wavering that meant his body was beginning to negotiate with his mind about how long this could hold. Lucian spoke from behind her. "Lower your weapon, Rourke." Nolan's eyes snapped to him. The gun steadied instantly. "Lucian." Mara said his name like a door closing. A beat of silence. "All right," Lucian said. His voice dropped back. Nolan's eyes moved between them. She could see him recalculating, trying to figure out the geometry of what he was looking at, whether this was a tactical maneuver, whether Mara was being used, whether the woman who had just named his dead brother's tattoo was an asset or a person. "You have 30 seconds, he said to Mara. "Tell me something only someone who was there would know." She didn't hesitate. She scared. Not before the breach. During. When the second wave hit and the ridge position collapsed, he was scared and he didn't try to hide it. Kept moving anyway. He was dragging a wounded contractor toward cover, and he was crying, and he kept moving. She paused. That's not weakness. That's what it actually looks like when someone does the right thing. Nolan Rourke's gun hand dropped 6 inches. It wasn't surrender, but it was something. Creed made an almost imperceptible movement, and Mara turned slightly and looked at him. Just looked. He read it and went still again. Nobody is engaging, she said, loud enough for the room. Everyone holds. 2 of Lucien's guards exchanged a glance. She was aware of how thin her authority was. In this specific situation, she was a rehabilitation nurse in scrubs, telling a professional security team what to do in an active weapons situation. She had no badge, no rank, no institutional standing here whatsoever. But nobody moved. Lucien was watching her with that same unreadable expression. The one she recognized from mountain cover 12 years ago, when the situation had been deteriorating by the minute and he'd been processing variables that would have paralyzed most people. He'd looked at her then, the way he was looking at her now, like she was something he hadn't fully accounted for and wasn't sure what to do with. You said everyone who knew you were coming today, Mara said quietly, turning slightly toward him. You said 3 people. Yes. Who are they? He looked at her. You're asking me in front of him. I'm asking you in front of everyone, she said. Because if Nolan Rourke knew you'd be here today at this specific hospital, at this specific time, someone told him. And that person is either in this room or connected to someone in this room. Temperature shifted. Silas Creed's head turned fractionally toward Lucien. Cut the sitter couldn't yet. One of the security guards near the north door stopped breathing in the audible way that people stop breathing when they become very conscious of their own breathing. Lucien said quietly, Silas knew my assistant, Brendan. And Tomas Vale, Creed said, I've been with you since 6 this morning. I know, Lucien said. Brendan has been with you 15 years, Creed said. I know that too. Nolan's eyes were moving between them. The gun was still in his hand, not raised, not holstered. He was listening. Tomas Vale, Massa said. Lucien's expression didn't change in any way that most people would have noticed. She noticed. He manages logistics, Lucien said. Does he have a reason to want today to go badly for you? The silence that followed that question had a different texture than the silences before it. It was the texture of something being admitted without words. He's been unhappy, Lucien said. There were disagreements, recent ones, about the direction of certain operations. Unhappy enough, Mara said, to tell a grieving man with a gun where to find you. She watched it land, watched Lucien file it in the place where he filed things that required cover response he wasn't ready to produce in public. Creed had gone very still in the way. Large men go still when they are deciding something. Nolan said, I found him myself. Everyone looked at him. I want that on record. He said, his voice had roughened. Whatever you people decide about your internal mess, I found Moretti. Nobody handed me anything. I've been tracking his public movements for 8 months. How did you know about this hospital visit? Mara asked. His calendar got posted in an industry briefing. His foundation announced a donation to the Veterans Wing 2 weeks ago. It wasn't hard. Lucien made a sound that wasn't quite a word. He looked at Creed. Creed said the foundation communication team. Who approved the public release? A pause. Vale coordinates the foundation calendar, Creed said. Something moved through the room. Not a sound. A realization with mass, the kind that changes the shape of everything around it. Mara felt Rook lean against her leg. The dog was reading the room the way he always had, not the words, the atmosphere beneath them. His body had gone taut. All right, she said. We're going to do this carefully. She looked at Nolan. You're going to sit down, not because I'm telling you to, but because your legs are shaking, and you've been running on adrenaline for however long, and it's going to give out on you. She looked at Lucien. You're going to sit across from him, and Silas is going to stand back 4 feet, and everyone else is going to give us 10 feet of space. Nolan said, You're not in charge here. I'm the only person in this room who isn't trying to kill anyone, she said. That gives me a kind of authority that outranks everything else right now. Stared at her. He sat down. The exhale that went through the room was almost audible. Lucien pulled out a chair and sat across from Nolan Rourke, with the controlled ease of a man who had negotiated across tables where the stakes were considerably higher than this, which was either reassuring or the most chilling thing about him, depending on how you looked at it. Creed moved back 4 feet. His weapon stayed in his hand. Mara stayed standing. "Talk," she said to Lucian. He looked at her. "You heard me," she said. "He came here for answers. Start with what you actually know." A long moment. Lucian put his hands on the table. Flat. The same gesture he'd made earlier, deliberate grounding. The physical version of choosing to be present rather than protected. "Your brother was assigned to the secondary team," he said to Nolan. "His job was communications relay and medical support. He was not supposed to be in the breach position." Nolan's jaw tightened, but he was. The primary comms operator was hit in the first 60 seconds. Cody moved up to fill the gap. He made that decision himself. No one ordered him forward. Then why didn't anyone tell us that? Nolan's voice cracked on the last word. Just for a second. He pulled it back. "My mother spent 3 years thinking he died because someone sent him into a position he wasn't prepared for. She died thinking that." Lucian didn't look away. "I know," he said. "You know." The crack in Nolan's voice widened and then sealed over hard. "You knew and you said nothing. The operations classification level. Don't." Nolan's hand was on the table now, the gun set down but close. "Don't tell me about classification levels. Tell me why a woman," he looked at Mara, then back. "Tell me why someone who was on the ground knew what my brother did, and I spent 12 years not knowing." Lucian was quiet for a moment. "Because I protected the operation," he said. "Because acknowledging Cody's specific role would have required acknowledging the full scope of what we were doing in that valley. And that scope was something I could not put into a public record." "So you buried my brother twice," Nolan said. The words sat there. Mara watched Lucian take them. Watched the thing it did to his face, not devastation, because he was not a man built for visible devastation, but something older and heavier that lived behind his eyes, in the place where the control lived. "Yes," he said. "That's what I did." Nolan picked up the gun. Mara moved before she knew she was moving. Not at Nolan. Between them. She put herself between Nolan Rourke's gun and Lucian Moretti's chest, and she felt rather than heard Rourke's claws on the floor, and Creed's sharp intake of breath, and the scramble of the security team recalibrating. "Don't," she said. Not loud. Direct. Nolan was breathing hard. The gun was up and she was in the way, and his hand was shaking for the first time since he'd walked through that door. "Move," he said. "No, you don't owe him anything." "I know," she held his gaze. "I'm not here for him. I'm here because if you pull that trigger, you become the thing you've been fighting to separate yourself from for 12 years. And that's not what Cody would recognize." "Don't tell me what Cody would." "He kept moving when he was terrified," she said. "He kept moving towards something instead of away from it. That's the thing he did that I can still see clearly 12 years later." Her voice didn't waver. "You came here for truth. You got some of it. The rest of it is still in the room, and you won't hear it if this goes the other way." Nolan's eyes were wet. He was fighting it. The fighting was visible in every muscle of his face, in the way his jaw locked and his shoulders heaved. Creed had a clean shot and was not taking it. Mara became aware that Lucian had stood up behind her. She could feel the warmth of him at her back. He was not hiding behind her. He was standing directly behind her, which was different, which was the choice of a man who understood that if she was putting her body between him and a bullet, the least he could do was not use her as cover. "Rourke," Lucian said. His voice was different now. Something had come off it. The control was still there, but the insulation was gone. "He's right. I buried what your brother did. I buried it because it served me. I've done a lot of things that served me and cost other people something they never got back. I can't give it back. But I can tell you everything, if you'll put the gun down." Nolan's arm was shaking. The gun came down slowly, by degrees, like something very heavy being lowered by someone who was running out of strength. It touched the table. His hand stayed on it, but it touched the table. Mara exhaled. Behind her, Creed exhaled too. She heard it. The cafeteria had gone so quiet, she could hear the hum of the ventilation system, the distant sound of someone running in the corridor outside, responding to the earlier shot, probably the building coming to terms with what had happened. Rourke pressed against her side. She looked at Nolan. Face had gone gray. The adrenaline was metabolizing now.
She could see it happening. The
Slight tremor in his hands. The way his eyes had gone unfocused for a second. 8 months of sustained vigilance, collapsing into whatever the other side of vigilance looks like. She pulled out the chair next to him and sat down. Not across from him. Next to him. He looked at her sideways. "I'm going to tell you what I saw," she said. "And then he's going to tell you what he knows. And if there are gaps between those two things, we're going to sit here until the gaps are filled." "And then what?" he asked. His voice had lost most of its structure. "And then you'll know," she said. "You'll actually know, instead of just being angry. And I can't tell you what that's worth, because that's yours to figure out. But I can tell you that anger, without knowing, is a very expensive thing to carry." Nolan said nothing. He pulled his hand off the gun. She looked up and met Lucien's eyes across the table. Something passed between them. Not a plan. Not a signal. Just the specific recognition of two people who had once moved through the same catastrophic darkness and come out in completely different shapes, finding themselves, improbably, in the same room again. Lucien sat back down, and then the corridor door opened a second time. Not Nolan's entrance. Not the controlled movement of a trained person. This was fast and low, someone moving with purpose, in the way that purpose looks when it's been rehearsed and the rehearsal time has just run out. Creed's weapon came up. Lucien was on his feet. The man who came through the door was wearing a hospital ID badge and a gray jacket, and the face of someone Mara had never seen before. He swept the room once, found Lucien, and his arm came up. Not a gun. A phone. He pressed something on it, and the entire building's emergency lighting dropped into a red-tinged backup glow as the primary power cut. In the sudden change of light, in the half-second of disorientation, Mara heard two things simultaneously: the hard thud of Creed's elbow hitting the intruder's forearm, and, from somewhere in the structure of the building itself deep, vibration level, the kind of sound you feel in your teeth before you hear it with your ears. The percussion of a device going off in the east utility corridor. Not a gunshot. A charge. The building shook. Plaster dust sifted from the ceiling. Someone screamed. A secondary alarm began to wail, different frequency from the fire system, the kind of alarm that meant structural rather than smoke. Mara grabbed the table edge. Rook was flat against her leg, shaking, every trained instinct in the animal, trying to find a command that fit this situation. In the red-tinged chaos, Nolan Rourke reached across the table. His hand closed around the gun. And in that moment, with the building still trembling, and the alarms screaming and Creed wrestling the intruder against the wall, and Lucien's guards shouting positions at each other across the room, Mara understood what she was looking at. This was not Nolan's operation. Nolan had come here for truth. Someone else had come here for something entirely different. And they had used Nolan's grief to get a room full of people exactly where they wanted them. She looked at Nolan and saw the moment he understood it too. Confusion on his face. The recalculation. The horror of a man realizing he has been a component in someone else's machine without ever knowing the machine existed. "Rourke," she said. He looked at her. "Whoever tipped you off about this location," she said, "they weren't doing it for you." His face went white. The gun was in his hand. The building was shaking. And from the east corridor, muffled by walls, but clear to anyone who knew the sound, came the steady, approaching footsteps of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment. Footsteps stopped. For 3 seconds, the east corridor was silent, except for the alarm and the dust settling from the ceiling and the sound of Creed pinning the man in the gray jacket against the wall with one forearm across his throat. The backup lighting threw everything in changed shades of red and shadow, and in that light every face in the cafeteria looked like something that had already been through the worst of it. Then the door opened. The man who stepped through was not built the way Nolan was built, or the way Creed was built. He was slight, narrow-shouldered, somewhere in his late 40s, wearing the kind of unremarkable clothing that is unremarkable by design. His hair was thinning. His hands were at his sides. He carried no visible weapon, and the absence of a visible weapon in that moment was more frightening than anything else would have been, because it meant either he wasn't expecting to need one, or he already had people in position who would need one for him. Mara knew his face. She had not known she knew it until she saw it. It surfaced from somewhere below deliberate memory, From the place where threat assessment lives a face she had seen in a photograph. Peripheral, context she couldn't immediately place. Specific background texture of a world she had spent 8 years excising from her life. Lucian knew him. She knew that because his body did something she had only seen it do twice before. It went very quiet. Not still in the way Creed went still, which was the stillness of readiness. Quiet. In the way a building goes quiet before the structure fails everything. Pulling inward, the energy redistributing. Something enormous about to give. Tomas, Lucian said. Tomas Vale closed the cafeteria door behind him. He looked at the room with the measured assessment of someone who had been watching the situation develop from outside and was now entering at the moment he had calculated to be optimal. His eyes moved across Creed, across the security team, across Nolan Rourke with the gun in his hand, across Mara. They stopped on Mara. "You're not supposed to be here," he said. Not to Lucian. To her. Mara felt something cold move through her chest. "He didn't know about you," Vale said, still looking at her. Conversational. The tone of a man explaining a minor logistical complication. "When I arranged this, she wasn't a variable. She was supposed to be dead." Lucian said, "What did you do?" Not a question. The grammar of it was wrong for a question. It was the grammar of a man arriving at a conclusion he had not wanted to reach, stating it aloud, so the room could be witness to the moment he got there. Vale looked at him then. "What needed to be done?" he said. "What you've been too sentimental to do for 4 years." One of Lucian's guards moved. Vale raised one hand, and the guard stopped, and the fact that the guard stopped at Vale's gesture told Mara everything she needed to know about how far this had gone and how long it had been going. "That's Renner," Creed said. His voice was flat. He was still holding the man from the gray jacket against the wall, but his eyes had moved to the guard. "I brought Renner in 18 months ago." "You did," Vale said. "Renner's been very useful." Creed's jaw tightened. "How many?" Lucian said. "In this building, 3. In your organization?" Vale tilted his head slightly. "Enough. Enough to manage a transition without the kind of chaos that's bad for business." Nolan Rourke was looking between Vale and Lucian with the expression of a man who came in through one door and found himself in a completely different building. The gun was still in his hand. He hadn't raised it. He was processing the way people process when the context of everything they thought they understood gets ripped out from underneath them. "You used him," Mara said. Vale looked at her. "You found Nolan Rourke," she said. "You found a man with a legitimate grievance and genuine damage, and you pointed him at this building like a distraction." She could hear her own voice, and it was not raised, and it was not warm. "Whatever your people planted in the East Corridor that wasn't about him." He was noise glaze. "You needed Lucian's security team disoriented," and his attention split. "You're quick," Vale said. "You were always supposed to be quick. That was the problem." "The mountain operation," she said. Something shifted in his face. Just slightly. The composed administrative surface cracking by a fraction. "The ambush wasn't random," she said. The words were coming together the way words come together when you've had a piece of information lodged in you for years without knowing what it connected to, and suddenly the circuit closes. 12 years ago, the ambush in Kunar, someone gave the opposing force our position. Someone who knew the timing, the entry route, the secondary ridge placement. She watched him. He did not deny it. "You were logistics," she said. "Even then. You coordinated the movement schedules." Lucian's voice, when it came, was at a register she had never heard from him before. "Tomas." "It was necessary," Vale said. The composure was back. He had decided to own it. The decision was visible in the way his shoulders settled, the way the apologetic quality left his voice, and something harder replaced it. The operation in that valley was going to expose 3 years of contract arrangements that would have ended everything. Not just your operation, Lucian. The entire Eastern network. I had partners who had not agreed to that exposure. "You sold our position," Lucian said. "I redirected an outcome. You sold our position." This time it was not a statement. It was something being carved into a permanent surface. People died. Cody Rourke died. Mara, he stopped. His jaw worked. Mara lost her leg. "Collateral arithmetic," Vale said. "The same arithmetic you've been doing for 30 years. Don't perform outrage at me, Lucian. You invented the framework. The silence that followed, that was the loudest silence Mara had ever stood inside. She watched Lucian absorb it. Watched him toss Vale's logic, which was Lucian's own logic, folded back and aimed at him, and process it in real time, and she watched it cost him something visible for the first time in her knowledge of him. His face did not collapse, but something behind it did. Something foundational. Nolan Rourke stood up. The chair scraped and everyone's attention moved to him and the gun in his hand, and for a second the room tilted back toward the most dangerous version of itself. But Nolan wasn't looking at Lucian anymore. He was looking at Vale. "My brother," he said. His voice had gone to a place past anger, past the sustained grinding rage that had brought him to this building. It was in the region of something that has no more architecture, just exposure, just rawness, just the sound of a person who has discovered that the thing they were fighting wasn't even the right thing. "My brother died because of you. Your brother died because he put himself in the wrong position at the wrong time," Vale said. "That's operational reality." Nolan moved. Mara moved faster. She caught his arm, the gun arm, her hand closing around his wrist with the specific grip she'd learned in another life, the grip that controls direction, without controlling the person, and she felt the enormous tension in him, the full-body contraction of a man at the absolute limit of what can be contained. "Not like this," she said. "Let go." His voice was shaking. "Not like this," she said again. "He wants this. He needs Lucian's team to engage, and the situation to go critical. Don't give him the moment he planned for." Nolan's arm was shaking under her hand. She held on. Rook was between them and Vale, the dog's body low, a sustained sound coming from him that was below a growl, something that vibrated in the chest rather than the ears. Vale looked at the dog with the first trace of genuine discomfort he had shown. Creed said, "Renner, drop it." The guard called Renner did not drop his weapon. Two of the remaining loyal security team had pulled their weapons and angles were crossing. The geometry of the room had become the kind of geometry where the next strong movement would produce a result that nobody in the room could control afterward. Vale took one step toward the far wall, where Mara now realized a secondary door existed behind a supply rack that she had not mapped when she'd come through earlier. Service exit. He had known it was there because he had planned to be here. "Lucian," Vale said, still in that tone. Reasonable. The tone of a board member tabling a difficult item. "You can let this moment define the next phase, or you can recognize that the organization survives better under management that isn't constrained by personal sentiment. I have the Eastern contracts. I have the port access agreements. I have 17 years of your operational documentation." A pause. "Come out of this cleanly, and you retire with your life, which is more than the arithmetic ever promised." Lucian looked at him. He looked at him for a long time. Then he said, very quietly, without turning around, "Mara." "Yes." The man Silas is holding. Creed, still pinning the gray jacket man against the wall, glanced sideways. "He's the one who cut the power," Lucian said. "Which means he knows where the device in the east corridor is wired." Mara understood immediately. The charge. If it's on a secondary trigger, if Tomas doesn't walk out of here with what he came for, Lucian said, the building doesn't benefit from his continued goodwill. She turned and looked at the man Creed was holding. His face was a mask, but his eyes went to Vale for the fraction of a second that made the answer clear. "It's on a dead man's switch," she said. Vale said nothing, which was the confirmation. Mara's mind ran the building layout in the 3 seconds she allowed herself for it. East corridor, utility access. The charge had gone off at the junction, which meant it was near the primary structural support for the wing above them. The wing that contained 17 post-surgical patients. The wing where Marcus Webb had taken 2 wheelchair-bound veterans when the first alarm sounded. "How large?" she said to Vale. He didn't answer Tomas. Her voice was different now. The nurse voice, not the operative voice. The voice she used with patients who were making decisions in pain that they could not undo. "How large is the secondary device?" "Large enough to make the negotiation straightforward," he said. Lucian moved. He crossed the cafeteria in 6 steps, covering the distance between himself and Tomas Vale at a speed that contradicted everything his usual controlled bearing suggested about what his body was capable of. And he had Vale's collar in his hand, before Renner could reposition, and the two loyal guards were covering Renner, and the entire room was one wrong breath from the worst possible version of itself. Lucian's face was 6 inches from Vale's. "The device," he said. Vale smiled. A small, precise, terrible smile. "You don't get to intimidate me anymore, Lucian. I know every tell you have. I helped build the myth. I know what's real and what's performance." "This isn't performance," Lucian said. "Then you'll spend the next 20 minutes finding the device and potentially save some patients. And while you do that, my people will have moved everything that matters." The smile again. "Or you release me, and I call off the secondary trigger, and we have a grown-up conversation about succession." "There's a third option," Mara said. Both men looked at her. She was looking at Renner. "You recruited him 18 months ago," she said to Vale. Then to Renner, "How long has the secondary device been in this building?" Renner's eyes moved to Vale. "Don't look at him," she said. "He's not the one standing in the building with you." Renner was young. She hadn't fully seen that until now, late 20s maybe, the size and the training masking it. Young enough that he had probably been recruited before he fully understood what he was being recruited into. Young enough that this specific situation, a building with a structural charge and a dead man's switch and 17 patients who couldn't walk, might not have been in the briefing. 18 months, she said. "Did you know about this? About the patients upstairs?" "They were never supposed to be in the building," Renner said. His voice was controlled but too flat, the flatness of someone containing something urgent. "They are," Mara said. "And you know what happens if that switch goes live." Lucian still had Vale by the collar. Creed still had the gray jacket man. 2 guards had Renner in their angles. Nolan Rourke was standing at the table with his gun at his side and an expression on his face that had traveled further in the last 4 minutes than most people's expressions travel in a decade. Renner looked at the floor, then at the ceiling, then at Mara. "East Utility Junction," he said, "behind the secondary electrical panel. There's a fail-safe toggle on the device itself, blue switch, 90-second window from activation. It won't disarm the primary trigger, but it'll isolate the secondary charge." Vale said, "Renner, there are patients upstairs," Renner said, and his voice broke on the word patients, in a way that meant the recruitment pitch had not included this particular detail, and not yet finished becoming the thing the recruitment needed him to become. Mara was already moving. Rook with her, the dog, reading the shift in her body and matching it, without command, both of them moving toward the east corridor door with the specific velocity of people who understand that time is now the only variable that matters. "Mara," Lucian's voice. She stopped at the door. "The panel is behind building security access," he said. "You'll need a code." "I have an override key," she said. "Every rehab staff member does. For patient emergency access. Beat. The specific beat of a man, recalibrating what he understood about the person he was looking at." She pushed through the door. The corridor was dark, except for the emergency lighting strips at ankle level, the red glow barely enough to navigate by, the air carrying a chemical smell that meant the primary charge had burned something in the walls. She moved fast, Rook's claws on the floor beside her, her prosthetic foot finding purchase on the emergency-lit tile. Utility junction was 60 feet down the corridor. She covered it in 15 seconds, her right leg's gait not slowing her, the way at once she'd learned years ago, to let momentum carry her through rather than fighting the asymmetry. The electrical panel was where Renner had said. The device behind it was smaller than she'd expected. The blue switch was exactly where he'd said. 90-second window. She looked at the device for exactly 2 seconds placement wiring, the toggle mechanism, and then she activated the failsafe. Small green indicator light appeared. She let out a breath that had been trapped somewhere in her ribcage since the first alarm. Then she heard footsteps behind her. Not Rook. Rook was beside her, and the dog had gone rigid, ears forward, body low. She turned. The man in the gray jacket was in the corridor. He had gotten free of Creed somehow. She didn't know how. She hadn't heard it, and he was 10 feet away, and he was not looking at the device. He was looking at her, and he had a secondary weapon in his hand, smaller than a standard firearm, the kind of thing that gets missed in a quick search. Vale said, "Don't let it get isolated," he said. He sounded apologetic about it. People who are genuinely dangerous often sound apologetic. she'd found. The ones who perform danger announce themselves. The ones who actually mean it explain themselves quietly and then act. His arm came up. Rook launched. Not at the weapon arm. At the man's center, the full weight of the aging Malinois hitting him at chest height, with everything 12 years of maintained training and 8 years of remembered purpose could produce. And the man went backward, and the shot went into the ceiling. And Mara was moving, before the sound finished, echoing. She caught the weapon hand on the way down, the same grip she'd used on Nolan's wrist, controlled direction, and she twisted and she heard something pop, and the weapon was on the floor, and the man was on the floor, and Rook was standing on his chest with that sustained vibration sound that had moved from below a growl to something more definitive. Mara stood over him. Her lungs were burning. Her right leg was aching in the phantom way it sometimes did after high-stress exertion. The leg that wasn't there sending distress signals to a nervous system that still expected it. She looked at the man on the floor. He was not getting up. Rook's position made that assessment clear. "Stay," she said to Rook. She picked up the secondary weapon and walked back into the cafeteria. The room had reorganized itself in her absence, in ways she hadn't planned. Creed had a cut above his eye that was bleeding down his jaw. Vale was on his knees, Lucian standing over him, 2 guards flanking. Renner was seated at a table with his hands flat and visible, and one of the guards was watching him without pointing anything at him, which suggested Ren had made a decision about which side of this he was going to end up on. Nolan Rourke was at the far wall with his arms folded, the gun no longer in his hands, watching all of it with the expression of a man who came for one thing and found everything else instead. "Secondary devices isolated," Mara said. "Your man is in the east corridor. Rook is sitting on him." Lucian looked at her. She looked back. "We need medical teams in the east corridor," she said. "Primary charge burned through something in the wall structure. I could smell it. We need structural engineering in here before we move the patients above us." She turned to the nurse named Delia, who was standing against the far wall with 3 other hospital staff, all of them frozen in the particular way of civilians who have been in a crisis long enough that movement feels dangerous. "Delia," she said, "I need you to get Dr. Sloan and whoever is in the surgical suite on standby, and I need the structural maintenance team on the east wing immediately." Delia moved. Mara looked at Vale. He was on his knees, and the composure had finally come apart. Not dramatically, it was not a collapse. It was more like watching a very precisely built structure settle when the load it was designed to carry gets removed. The administrative surface, the reasonable tone, the framework of cold cost-benefit that had let him sell a mountain position 12 years ago and plant explosives in a veterans hospital today, all of it was still there. Technically, but it had lost the structural integrity that made it convincing. He was looking at her with something she recognized after a moment as the specific hatred of someone who underestimated a variable and knows they will spend the rest of their time paying for the miscalculation. "You should have stayed dead," he said. "You should have made sure of it the first time," she said. She walked past him and sat down next to Nolan Rourke. He looked at her sideways, the same way he had before when she'd sat next to him instead of across from him. "You okay?" she asked. "No," he said. "That's the right answer," she said. He looked at his hands. They were shaking slightly. "Come down. The body's invoice, arriving after the adrenaline, closes its account." "He used me," Nolan said. "Yes. I came here thinking I knew what happened, and I didn't know anything." "You knew some of it," she said. "The part about your brother being buried twice, that part was real. That part was true." He looked at Lucian, who was speaking in a low, fast murmur to Creed, one hand pressed against his own sternum in a way that looked unconscious, like a man checking whether something is still intact. "Does knowing the truth make it better?" Nolan asked. Mara thought about that. "No," she said, "but it makes it yours. And that's different from carrying something that belongs to someone else's lie." Nolan was quiet for a moment. "What happens now?" he asked. She looked at Lucian. She looked at Vale on his knees. She looked at the cafeteria, the overturned chairs, the dust on every surface, the red emergency lighting that made the whole room look like the interior of something that had already been through the worst. The building still standing, patients above them still alive, the east corridor isolated, Rook still on duty somewhere down the hall. Now, she said, we find out who everyone actually is. And across the room, Lucian Moretti looked up from his conversation with Creed, and his eyes found hers in the red light. And in his face, she saw something she had not expected to see there. Not power, not control, not the practiced steadiness of the most feared man in the city. She saw a man who was about to have to decide, in front of witnesses, whether the thing he had built his entire life on was worth the price it had extracted from everyone around him, including her, including himself. The maintenance alarm was still wailing. Somewhere above them, a patient was calling out, and Mara Vesper, who had spent 8 years, being the quiet woman with the limp, who absorbed humiliation and kept moving, sat in the ruins of an ordinary Tuesday and understood that she was no longer going to be able to be quiet about any of it. The maintenance alarm cut out, not gradually, all at once, mid-wail, the silence slamming into the room like a physical thing. In the sudden quiet, every sound that had been buried under it surfaced simultaneously. Creed's breathing, the distant sound of someone upstairs calling for a nurse, the soft creak of the building settling after the charge blast, Rook's claws on the corridor tile as the dog padded back through the cafeteria door and found Mara's side without being summoned. The emergency lighting was still red. It made everything look like the inside of a decision that couldn't be taken back. Lucian was standing over Tomas Vale, and Creed was to his left, with the cut above his eye still running. And the 2 loyal guards had Renner at the table, and the gray-jacket man had been brought back in from the corridor by a 3rd guard, his wrist wrapped in a compression bandage that Delia had produced from somewhere, his face carrying the specific expression of someone who has recently had a Belgian Malinois standing on their sternum and has not yet emotionally processed it. Vale was still on his knees. He had been on his knees for 6 minutes. Mara had been counting, not deliberately, but the way the body counts things when it is running a parallel assessment of a situation. 6 minutes on his knees, and he had not asked to stand. He was not the kind of man who asked. He was waiting for the moment when asking would produce the most leverage, and he had not identified that moment yet, which meant he was still calculating, which meant he was still dangerous. Lucian crouched down. He brought his face level with Vale's. The charcoal suit was dusty now, the left shoulder carrying a grayish film from when the blast had shaken debris from the ceiling. He didn't look like the man who had walked into this cafeteria 2 hours ago. He looked like a man who had been taken apart and put back together in a different configuration, and the new configuration hadn't fully set yet. The Eastern contracts, Lucian said, the port access, the operational documentation. His voice was very low. Where? Vale looked at him. You know I'm not going to tell you that kneeling on a cafeteria floor, Vale said. You're going to tell me something, Lucian said. Because right now the only thing between you and what Sas wants to do is me. And I'm running low on the particular quality that makes me want to extend that protection. Vale's mouth moved into something that was structurally a smile. You need what I have. I need to know where it is, Lucian said. Whether you're the one who tells me is a secondary consideration. A silence. You've gone soft, Vale said. This room. This woman. Whatever this is you're performing. Gone soft, and the organization is going to fracture because of it. And everything you built for 30 years is going to come apart because you couldn't make one clean decision when the mathematics required it. Lucian stood up. He turned to Creed. Get him up, he said. Creed hauled Vale to his feet with one arm, the efficiency of it making clear that the cut above his eye and whatever else the struggle in the cafeteria had cost him, not currently a factor in his operational capacity. Lucian said to Mara, I need 20 minutes with him, somewhere in this building that isn't this room. Mara looked at him. Patient interview rooms, she said. North corridor, 2nd door. The lock is keyed to hospital admin access, and there's no external window. Lucian nodded. Nolan stays here, Mara said. Lucian looked at Nolan Rourke, who was still at the far wall with his arms folded and the gun no longer visible, watching everything with eyes that had gone from grief-sharp to something quieter and more exhausted. He's not going anywhere, Lucian said. It was not said unkindly. Nolan said nothing. Creed moved Vale toward the north corridor. One guard flanked. Lucian followed, and before he went through the door, he paused and looked back at Mara with the look of a man who has something to say and has assessed the timing as wrong. and is filing it away for later. Then he was gone. The cafeteria exhaled. Mara turned to the hospital staff. Delia was still present, and 2 orderlies, and Marcus Webb, who had come back from wherever he'd taken the wheelchair patients. His face carrying the particular expression of a man who has processed events by converting them into tasks and is ready for the next task. "Marcus," she said, "I need the structural maintenance team status." "Called in," he said. "They've been in the East Corridor for the last 8 minutes. Initial assessment is the charge blew the junction housing, but the load-bearing wall is intact. They're calling it cosmetic damage plus electrical." She let that settle into her body. Cosmetic damage plus electrical. Patients above them were safe. "The 2 veterans you moved," she said, "settled in the physical therapy suite. Both stable." She nodded. Renner was still at the table. She walked over and sat across from him. He watched her come with the expression of someone who has made a choice and is now waiting to find out what the choice costs. "How long?" she said. He knew what she meant. 18 months active. Another 3 before that being cultivated. "Who cultivated you?" "Vale's intermediary. I never had direct contact until 6 months in." "What did he tell you this was?" Renner looked at the table. He was young up close. 26, maybe 27. Kind of young that combat training and professional conditioning can mask until the mask comes off. "A succession management operation," he said. "Moretti is aging. The Eastern network is too large and too exposed for one man to hold together long term. Vale presented it as a stabilization plan. Structured transition. Limited disruption. Did the plan include a structural charge in a veteran's hospital?" He didn't answer Renner. "The original plan didn't," he said. "The hospital was added 3 weeks ago when Vale found out Moretti was coming here. The charge was supposed to be a distraction. Create chaos, pull the security team into emergency response mode, give Vale's people time to access Moretti's vehicle and documentation. And the dead man's switch." He was quiet for a moment. "That was added without my knowledge," he said. "I found out this morning." She looked at him. He held her gaze. He was not performing candor. She had spent 8 years working with people who were performing recovery and people who were actually attempting it. And the difference was in the eyes, in the specific quality of exposure that happened when a person stopped managing how they looked and just looked. "What happens to me now?" he said. "That's not mine to determine," she said. "But you told me where the failsafe was, and you didn't take the shot you had when I was in the corridor." "I didn't have a shot," he said. "Rook was faster than I expected." "I know," she said, "but you could have followed me." "You didn't." He looked at the table again. Mara stood up. She moved to the cafeteria window internal, overlooking the hospital's main atrium, not an extra exposure, and stood there for a moment with her hand on the glass and let herself breathe for the first time since the alarm had cut out. Rook materialized at her side, his grayed muzzle pressing briefly against her hand before he settled into his position. Watch duty. He had never stopped being on watch duty. Outside in the atrium, she could see the first emergency responders arriving. Police 2 units moving through the main entrance with the careful systematic deployment of people responding to an active threat call on an institution. They would be up here in minutes. She thought about what those minutes needed to produce. Her mind ran it clinically. The way she ran differential diagnoses. What did they have? What did they need? What were the gaps? And how do you close them before the situation locks into a shape you can't adjust? They had Vale. They had the gray jacket man. They had Renner on the edge of full cooperation. They had Nolan Rourke, who had come here with a gun and a legitimate grievance, and had been used by a man who didn't care about either, and held sitting in a cafeteria chair, and who was now sitting in a cafeteria chair looking like something that had been disassembled and hadn't been put back together yet. What they did not have was whatever Vale had stored off-site. Eastern contracts. The operational documentation. 17 years of material that could expose Lucian's empire to federal prosecution, or could be leveraged to fracture it from within, depending on who had access to it. Whatever happened in the patient interview room in the next 20 minutes was going to determine which version of the next year everyone in this building lived. She was still at the window when she heard it, not loud. The building was large, and the interview room was at the far end of the north corridor. But she had worked in this building for 8 years, and she knew its acoustics the way she knew her patients' resting heart rates, intuitively, specifically from the accumulated data of daily proximity. What she heard was a voice raised to a pitch that Lucian Moretti's voice did not naturally occupy. Then something breaking, then silence. Nolan was on his feet before she turned. Put one hand out. Stay, she said. He stopped. She looked at the remaining guard, covering the gray jacket man, then at the door. She moved into the north corridor. The corridor was darker than the cafeteria. The emergency lighting here reduced to a single strip. The red glow thin and directional. She moved fast, Rook with her, the dog's body language shifting as they approached the second door, not threat response, something more ambiguous, the animal reading something in the air that translated into alertness rather than aggression. The door was closed. She opened it. The interview room was small 4 chairs, a table, a wall-mounted monitor used for remote physical therapy consultations. One of the chairs was on its side. Creed was against the far wall with his arms folded. The guard who had flanked was in the corner. Lucian was standing at the table with both hands flat on the surface, his head down, breathing hard. Vale was seated. He had a split lip. He had not had a split lip when he left the cafeteria. Lucian's right hand was red across the knuckles. He looked up when Mara came in. His eyes were not the eyes of the man who had sat across from her at the cafeteria table and admitted the mountain operation with careful, measured honesty. Something else was in them. Something old, something with a long history, something that had been living underneath the control for a very long time and had gotten out. Out, she said to Creed. Creed looked at Lucian. Lucian nodded. Creed and the guard left. She closed the door. The 3 of them, Mara, Lucian, Vale. Rook sat at the door. Vale touched his split lip with one finger, looked at the blood on it, looked at Lucian. There it is, he said. There's the version you've been trying to civilize for 30 years. Quiet, Mara said. Vale looked at her. You hit him, she said to Lucian. Not an accusation. A fact that needed to be on the table. Once, Lucian said. Once is enough to compromise everything that comes after this when law enforcement arrives, she said, which is going to be in approximately 7 minutes. She looked at Vale. Did he ask you a question? Several, Vale said. Did you answer any of them? I answered the ones that served my interests. She pulled out a chair and sat down across from him, put her hands on the table flat, in the same gesture Lucian had used. She did it deliberately, without thinking about it, and only realized after she'd done it that it was his gesture, absorbed from years of proximity, and now apparently hers too. The documentation, she said. The Eastern contracts. All of it. Where is it stored? Vale smiled at her. Split lip made it worse. You're going to interrogate me now? The rehabilitation nurse? I'm going to talk to you, she said. Because Lucian is too angry right now to hear what you're actually saying. And what you're actually saying is that you want a way out of this room that preserves something. You didn't give up the dead man's switch location until you had to. You didn't give up anything until it cost you something to hold it. That means you're still running a cost-benefit analysis. So let's do that. Something shifted in Vale's face. The smile became less structural. Law enforcement arrives in 7 minutes, she said. When they do, the situation gets documented in a form that none of us control. What happens to you in that documentation depends entirely on what exists in the next 7 minutes. You can be the man who planted a device in a veteran's hospital, held patients hostage, and went silent. Or you can be the man who cooperated. She paused. Lucian's organization has federal exposure. You know that. You built the exposure in. But federal agencies make arrangements with people who provide what they need. You know that too. Vale was looking at her. The documentation is in a cloud partition, he said. Access keyed to biometric and a 16-digit code. Where's the biometric? My thumbprint. And the code. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said it. 18 digits. She repeated them in her head 3 times, and then turned to Lucian, who had been standing at the wall, listening with his arms folded, and his right hand still red, across the knuckles. You heard that, she said. Yes, he said. Creed needs to move on it in the next 6 minutes, before this room becomes official. Lucian opened the door and said Creed's name. When Creed appeared, Lucian relayed the partition information in a murmur so Low, it barely crossed the threshold. Creed was on his phone before the door closed again. Vale watched this happen. "That's not admissible," he said. "No," Mara agreed. "But it's removable. And once it's removed, what you have to offer changes considerably." The specific quality of the silence that followed was the silence of a man realizing he has been outmaneuvered not by force, but by something that moved differently from force, something that read his logic and used it against him. He was not enraged by it. He was something closer to reluctantly impressed, which was almost worse to look at. "You're very good at this," he said to Mara. "I had a good teacher," she said. She did not look at Lucian. When she said it, Lucian said, "The mountain operation. 12 years ago." Say it to her face. Vale looked at Mara. She held his gaze. "I sold the position," he said. "I gave the opposing unit your entry route and timing." "Who paid you?" "A consortium. Eastern European. They had port interests that Lucian's network was undercutting." "Cody Rourke was 24 years old," she said. "Yes, and I lost my leg." "Yes, she let that sit in the room. She didn't do anything with it. She just let it exist between the three of them. In the small red-lit room, with the overturned chair and the table and Rook at the door." Then she stood up. "I'm going to go meet the police," she said to Lucian. "I'm going to tell them what happened in this building today, the version that accounts for the device, the hostage situation, and the man who orchestrated both. I'm going to do that clearly and accurately, and I'm going to leave out the parts that are yours to manage." She looked at him. "What you do in the next 5 minutes is your decision." "Can't make it for you, and I'm not going to," Lucian said Mara. She stopped. He was looking at her across the table, across Vale between them, across the 12 years and the mountain and the leg she'd lost and the dog she'd left behind and every version of herself she'd cycled through, trying to get to somewhere quiet enough to live in. "I know," she said, before he could find the words. "I know." She left the room. The north corridor was darker than before, the single emergency strip flickering now, and her right leg ached in the deep way. It ached when adrenaline stopped covering for it, the stump pressure building against the socket, the signal her body sent when it had been asked to do too much for too long without complaint. She knew the signal. She had learned to read it, the way she read all her patients' signals, as information, not instruction. Kept moving. At the corridor's end, where it opened back into the atrium, she could see through the glass the blue and red of police lights outside, the systematic movement of responders, setting perimeter, a paramedic team staging near the entrance. She could see something else. In the cafeteria, through the interior window, Nolan Rourke had moved. He was no longer at the far wall. He was sitting across from the gray jacket man at the table, and they were talking. Not arguing, talking. The gray jacket man's bandaged wrist was on the table between them, and Nolan was looking at him with the specific attention of someone who has just discovered that the person in front of him is also a variable in someone else's equation, and that discovery has done something to the anger. Mara stood in the corridor and watched that for a moment. Then she heard the door at the end of the north corridor open. She turned. Lucian was in the corridor. He was alone. No Creed, no guard. "Vale," she said. "Creed has him," he said. "He'll be in police custody in 3 minutes. Cooperative custody." A pause. He made a calculation. "I know," she said. "I gave him the numbers." Lucian walked toward her. He stopped 6 feet away. In the flickering emergency light, with the dust still on his shoulder, and his right hand bruised across the knuckles, and his face carrying something that had not been there when he walked into the cafeteria hours ago, he looked less like the most feared man on the East Coast than he looked like a man who was tired in a way that power had never been able to touch. "The operation," he said. 12 years ago. What Vale did. "I already knew it wasn't random," she said. "I've known for years it wasn't random. I didn't know who. I didn't know either," he said. "I need you to know that." She looked at him. She believed him. Not because she needed to, not because it made things easier, because she had spent 8 years learning to read the difference between what people said when they were managing a situation and what they said when they were just trying to be true to something. And this was the second kind. "There's going to be an investigation," she said. "Federal. What happened today, the device, the casualties. Vale's cooperation, it's going to open doors that were closed before." "I know. Your organization, I know," he said again. She looked at him. He was looking back at her with the stillness of a man who has arrived at a decision and is standing in the moment before the decision becomes action, the last moment of its kind. "I've been thinking," he said, "for 12 years, about what I would change if I had it back." "Don't," she said. "Won't," she said, not harshly, because the version of that conversation where you tell me what you'd change and I tell you what I'd change goes somewhere we can't come back from tonight. And tonight I need to go talk to the police, and you need to deal with what's coming. And Nolan Rourke needs someone to sit with him for more than 5 minutes. And Rook needs water, because he hasn't had any since this started, and he's 14 years old, and he just took a man down, and he's earned it. Something happened in Lucian's face. Something happened in Lucian's face. Something between pain and the specific recognition of a person who has just been reminded what they love about someone by being told not to say it. "All right," he said. "All right," she said. Neither of them moved. The blue and red light from outside pulsed through the atrium glass and laid itself across the corridor floor between them. And in that light she could see Lucian Moretti with extraordinary clarity, not the newspaper photograph, not the feared name, not the empire or the machinery of violence, or the charcoal suit now gray with hospital dust. Just the man. Just the 53-year-old man who had broken 3 fingers in a mountain and set them himself and never had them properly fixed, standing in a corridor with his bruised hand at his side and 12 years of the wrong kind of silence between them. Rook padded out of the cafeteria doorway and sat between them. He looked at Lucian, then at Mara, then settled onto his haunches with the particular finality of an old dog who has decided the immediate emergency is over and the rest of it is the human's problem. "He always did know when to quit," Lucian said. "He never quits," Mara said. "He just changes what he's working on." From the main entrance, the police team was moving into the atrium. 2 officers leading, a sergeant behind them, hands on holsters but not drawing. The disciplined deployment of professionals entering a scene where the primary threat status was uncertain. Mara straightened. She touched Rook once on the top of his head. "Stay close to him," she said to the dog. Then she walked to meet the police, her prosthetic foot steady on the tile, her right leg carrying her forward, the way it always had, not smoothly, not without cost, but without stopping, the building behind her still standing. Patients above her, still breathing, the man in the corridor at her back, standing in the complicated wreckage of what he was and what he was going to have to choose to become. She was 30 feet from the sergeant when her hospital radio crackled. Marcus Webb's voice, "Mara. The East Wing structural team found something in the wall cavity behind the charge site. It's not damage." She stopped walking. "It's a secondary device," Marcus said. "Different configuration. And Mara, it's on a timer, not a switch." Turned. Lucian was still in the corridor. Their eyes met across the atrium. "Timer," Marcus had said. And the only person who knew the configuration, the only person who could tell them how long they had, and whether the failsafe she'd activated on the first device had any relationship to this one, was Tomas Vale, who was at this moment being delivered into police custody at the front entrance, 30 feet away, moving through a door that would close behind him in approximately 45 seconds. She ran. Not the careful, measured gait she had spent 8 years perfecting, the one that absorbed the asymmetry and made it look like a choice rather than an adaptation. Flat-out run, the one that cost her, the one where her right leg swung through its arc and the impact came up through the socket in a way that would leave bruising tomorrow, and she did not care about tomorrow. She cared about the next 40 seconds. "Vale," she called across the atrium. The sergeant turned. 2 officers flanking him turned. Vale, hands zip-tied in front of him. Creed at his left shoulder, turned. She crossed the atrium in 12 seconds. "Secondary device," she said to the sergeant. She was breathing hard, not from fear, from pace. "East wing wall cavity. Timer configuration. This man knows the setup." She looked at Vale. "How long?" Vale looked at her. "Tomas." She stepped close enough that the officers between them shifted instinctively. She did not lower her voice for him. She did not give him the dignity of privacy for this particular negotiation. 17 patients in the East Wing, post-surgical. 2 of them cannot be moved without risk of reopening active repair sites. "Tell me the timer," he held her gaze. 3 seconds. Then, 90 minutes from initial device activation. When was activation? 14:12. She looked at her watch. 14:51. She looked at the sergeant. 39 minutes, she said. I need your bomb disposal call made in the next 60 seconds, and I need this man talking to whoever receives it, because he knows the secondary device configuration. And the failsafe I activated on the primary may have compromised the timer circuit, which means we could be looking at acceleration. The sergeant was already on his radio. Vale said quietly, so only she could hear it. The failsafe isolation doesn't touch the secondary circuit. They're independent systems. Your patients have 39 minutes, not less. She looked at him. He was not performing contrition. He was not asking for anything. He was just giving her the information in the tone of a man who has decided, in some calculus she didn't fully understand and didn't need to, that this particular piece of honesty cost him nothing that mattered anymore. Thank you, she said. She turned back to the sergeant. Independent circuits. The timer is accurate. You have 39 minutes, and the configuration is standard commercial grade, not military. Your disposal team will recognize it. The sergeant was a compact woman in her mid-40s, with close-cropped hair, and the particular economy of movement that came from years of working situations where wasted motion had real consequences. She looked at Mara once, the full-body professional assessment, the kind that takes less than 2 seconds and produces a working conclusion. Your hospital staff, the sergeant said. Rehabilitation nursing, 8 years. You isolated the primary device. Yes, the sergeant said. Stay accessible. Then she was on her radio, the disposal call going out. Her voice clipped and precise. Mara turned. Lucien was behind her. He had crossed the atrium while she'd been running, quieter than she'd expected, and he was standing 4 feet away, with Rook at his side and his bruised hand at his hip, and the particular expression of a man who has just watched someone do something and is recalibrating every assumption he was carrying. 39 minutes, she said. I heard. Your people need to be out of the East Wing. Creed is already moving them. He paused. You went for him instead of the sergeant. The sergeant didn't know what I needed her to know. You trusted Vale to tell you the truth. She looked at him. I trusted him to tell me the truth, when telling the truth cost him nothing, and lying to me cost him the only thing he had left, which was the version of himself that isn't the man who killed 24-year-olds and planted bombs in hospitals. A beat. People will hold on to that version sometimes. Even people who've done everything Vale has done. Lucien was quiet for a moment. Is that why you do this work? He said. The nursing. She hadn't expected that question. Not now. Not in the middle of the atrium with the police radios going and the emergency lights still throwing everything in red and blue. I do this work because it's the thing I'm good at that doesn't kill anyone, she said. He absorbed that. The disposal team arrived 11 minutes later, 2 vehicles. 4 technicians, the sergeant coordinating their entry into the East Wing, with the focused efficiency of someone who had been trained for exactly this. Mara walked them through the building layout, the corridor access, the structural assessment from the maintenance team. She did it standing in the atrium with Rook beside her, and the police sergeant at her shoulder, and Lucien somewhere behind her, at a distance that was close enough to be far as enough to be appropriate, which she noted and said nothing about. The next 23 minutes were the longest, 23 minutes she had experienced since the mountain. She stood at the atrium window. She watched the East Wing, counted breaths. Not her own, she had long since stopped tracking her own breathing as a measure of anything. Counted the breaths she couldn't see. The ones happening in the rooms above the East Wing, the post-surgical patients who did not know that the building they were recovering in had been used as a chess piece in someone else's succession plan. Rook sat against her leg. His warmth was specific and solid and real. At minute 21, the disposal team's lead came through the atrium door. Devices neutralized, he said to the sergeant. The sergeant looked at Mara. Mara put her hand on Rook's head and did not say anything, because there was nothing to say that wouldn't come out wrong. The building did not explode. The patients above the East Wing continued to breathe and sleep and call for nurses and move through the ordinary discomfort of recovery, none of them knowing how close the arithmetic had come. In the aftermath, everything happened slowly and then very fast and then slowly again. Police processed the cafeteria. Statements were taken from hospital staff, from Renner, from the gray jacket man whose name turned out to be Feld and who cooperated completely and immediately with the particular relief of someone who had been living inside a decision they regretted and had been waiting for the moment when the regret became actionable. Vale was taken into formal custody, the zip ties replaced with proper restraints, the cooperative arrangement Mara had outlined to him in the interview room already being formalized through she was not part of and did not need to be. Nolan Rourke sat in the cafeteria through all of it. He had not been handcuffed. The sergeant had assessed him early. The gun had been surrendered. The cooperation had been evident from the first officer contact. And whatever Mara said to the sergeant in the atrium had produced a handling decision that gave him room to breathe rather than closing him down. He sat at the table where Mara had sat next to him, and he looked at the surface of it, and he did not speak to anyone for a long time. She found him there, an hour after the disposal team cleared the building. She sat down next to him, same side, same angle. He looked at her sideways. "Am I under arrest?" he said. "Not yet," she said. "Possibly not at all. The sergeant is focused on Vale and the device. Your situation is," she considered the word, "complicated by the fact that you were a victim of the same operation you came here to be part of." "I came here with a gun," he said. "You did. I fired in a hospital building. Into the ceiling of an empty corridor," she said. "Feld's statement confirms that. And Feld is talking." Nolan looked at his hands. "I thought I knew what happened," he said. "I thought I'd spent 8 months building a complete picture." "You had pieces of a complete picture," she said. "Vale gave you the pieces that served him. That's what manipulative people do. They don't lie to you completely. They just arrange the truth into a shape that makes you move the way they need you to move." "My brother," he said. She waited. "Everything I knew about how he died was wrong," he said. "And everything I knew about why was wrong. And I spent 4 years building something out of the wrong version." His voice broke on the last word, the way it had broken in the cafeteria before. He didn't try to seal it over this time. He let it break. "My mother died thinking he was sent into a position he wasn't prepared for. That's what she died thinking." "I know," Morris said. "And the truth is that he went forward on his own. Because someone needed to." "Yes. He was scared and he went forward anyway," Nolan said. He stopped. He put his fist against his mouth for a moment, the physical gesture of containing something that needed to be contained until it was safe to let it out. She recognized it from years of working with people who were trying to survive their own grief without drowning in it. "Sounds like him," he said. "That sounds exactly like him." She let that sit. After a while, she said, "What do you need right now?" He thought about it. "I need to call my sister," he said. "She doesn't know any of the real version. She's been carrying the same wrong story I was." "There's a family consultation room, 2 floors up," Mara said. "Private line. I can take you there." He looked at her. "Why are you helping me?" he said. Not suspicious. Genuinely uncertain. The question of a man who has been in a transactional world long enough to have stopped expecting things that weren't transactions. "Because Cody ran towards something when he was terrified," she said. "And you came here for the same reason, even if Vale was using you for something else. That matters." She paused. "And because I've been quiet for 12 years, and staying quiet about the things that mattered was the most expensive decision I ever made." Nolan nodded slowly. The nod of a man taking something on board that he wasn't ready to fully process but was going to carry until he was. 2 floors up, he said. "Elevator's working," she says. The charge didn't touch the main systems. She walked him to the elevator and left him there with the room number, and came back downstairs and found Lucian in the hospital courtyard. Courtyard was a small outdoor space on the building's south side, a concrete rectangle with 3 benches and a row of planters that someone had filled with low-maintenance shrubs, kind of outdoor space that gets added to institutional buildings as a gesture toward the idea of recovery, without anyone spending enough on it to make it actually restorative. At 9 in the evening, with the building behind them still lit with the extra intensity of an active police scene, it was cold and slightly damp, and mostly empty. Lucian was sitting on the center bench. Rook was beside him. She stopped in the doorway for a moment and looked at that. The old dog, leaning against the knee of the man who had technically owned him for 12 years and practically owned him for none. and the man's large hand resting on the animal's back with the careful weight of someone handling something they are not certain they deserve. She crossed the courtyard and sat on the bench, not next to him, one bench over, close enough for conversation. He looked at her. "Creed," she said. "Handling the organizational piece," Lucian said. "There are people in the Eastern Network who were loyal to Vale's arrangement and people who weren't. Creed knows who's who. He's been knowing for a while, I think. How long did you know about the fracture?" He was quiet for a moment. "I knew something was wrong for about 6 months. I didn't know it was Vale until today. I thought," he stopped, exhaled. "I was looking at the wrong people. I was looking at people I'd had conflicts with. Vale and I never had open conflicts. He was always the one managing things smoothly. That's how it works," she said. "The ones you trust absolutely are the ones who've learned what trust looks like." He looked at her. "Like you," he said. She met his gaze. "I left," she said. "That's different from betrayal." "I know," he said. "I know it's different. I'm not." He stopped again. He did this more now, she noticed. Stopped himself more. The man she had known 12 years ago had been more decisive in speech, less willing to let a sentence die before completing it. 12 years of something had changed that. She wasn't sure if it was wisdom or damage or both, which were sometimes the same thing. "I missed you," he said. Plain, no performance in it. She looked at the planters. "I know," she said. "You could have contacted me. I know that too. But you didn't." "No," she said. "Because the person I was when I was with you was a person I couldn't keep being. And I didn't know how to separate those things, you and who I was with you. I'm not sure I know now." He was quiet. "The rehabilitation center," he said. She looked at him. "You mentioned it earlier," he said. "When you were before the second device. You said something to Nolan about what you'd spent 8 years building toward. A center for people abandoned by the systems that were supposed to protect them." She had not said that to Nolan. She had said it in the cafeteria, herself, half-formed, the idea she'd been carrying for 2 years, without telling anyone. "You were listening," she said. "I'm always listening to you," he said. "I was listening 12 years ago. I was listening when I shouldn't have let you leave. I was listening badly, but I was listening." She breathed in the damp courtyard air. "It's not ready," she said. "The plan. I have a location I've been looking at, a former outpatient clinic on the east side that closed during the hospital consolidation. I have a framework. I don't have funding. I have funding," he said. "Your funding comes with complications." "Everything I have comes with complications," he said. "I know that. I'm not," he looked at his bruised hand. "I'm not asking to be part of it. I'm not asking to put my name on it, or have access to it, or to use it for anything. I'm asking if I can give you the thing you need to build the thing that should exist." She looked at him for a long time. The courtyard was quiet. Inside the building, the police processing continued, voices and radios, the institutional machinery of accounting for what had happened. Out here, there was wind against the shrubs and Rook breathing. "There would be conditions," she said. "I know. The center operates independently. No organizational connection. No personnel from your network. No access. If I ever find a connection," she said, "any connection, the arrangement ends, and I return whatever's been given." "Yes. And the federal investigation that's coming," she said. "Whatever they find when they open Vel's documentation, you cooperate. Fully. I'm not asking you to dismantle everything overnight. I'm asking you to stop protecting the pieces that need to come apart." He looked at her. This was the question she had not been planning to ask. It had formed itself on the way through the courtyard, without her authorization, built from everything she had seen in his face tonight. In the interview room, when Vale had said, "You buried my brother twice." In the corridor, when he'd said, "I know." In the cafeteria, when he'd stood behind her, instead of using her as cover. He was quiet for a long time. Rook shifted against his knee. "There are people in the organization who've done nothing wrong," he said. "Drivers, accountants, people who work logistics and don't know what the logistics are for, people with families." "I know," she said. "I'm not asking for a massacre. I'm asking for a direction." Another long quiet. "All right," he said. She nodded. She did not feel triumphant about it. It was not a triumphant kind of thing. It was heavy and real, and would cost him in ways she couldn't fully calculate, and would cost the people around him, and would cost her something too, in ways that hadn't revealed themselves yet. because his decisions, made at the honest end of an extraordinary day, had a way of expanding into territory you hadn't surveyed when you made them. But it was the direction. "Rook," she said. The dog looked at her. "Come here," she said. He crossed from Lucian's knee to hers and put his head in her lap the way he had done in the cafeteria 8 hours and a lifetime ago. Put both hands in his fur and felt the trembling that had quieted. The animal exhaustion of a 14-year-old dog hag who had done everything asked of him today and more. Lucian watched her with Rook. "I'd like you to have him," he said. "Officially. Not just tonight, he's already mine," she said. He decided that this afternoon. Something moved through Lucian's face that she chose not to name. She had been choosing not to name things in his face for 8 hours, and she thought that was probably the right policy for the foreseeable future. "What happens now?" he said. "Not about the organization. About them. About the space between the two benches. Now," she said, "you go deal with what's coming, and I go back inside and write a very long incident report. And Nolan Rourke calls his sister, and tomorrow exists, which today it wasn't certain it would. And after that," he said. She looked at him. "After that," she said, "I don't know. That's the first honest answer I've given anyone in 8 years about what comes next." He looked at her with that expression she had no word for and wasn't going to find one tonight. "I'll take it," he said. She stayed in the courtyard for another 20 minutes after he went back inside. Rook stayed with her, his head in her lap, his breathing evening out into the deep, steady rhythm of an animal that has decided the emergency is categorically over and is now operating on reserves and trust. The cold settled more firmly. The police lights at the front of the building had reduced from full emergency configurations to a working presence. The active crisis replaced by the slower machinery of documentation and consequence. She thought about Cody Rourke, who had been scared and gone forward anyway. She thought about her leg and what it had taken 8 years to understand about it. Not that it was proof of survival, though it was, but that it had been, for most of those 8 years, the thing she organized her life around avoiding. She had built her quietness around it. She had built her smallness around it. She had let Sloane's cruelty land without consequence because some part of her had agreed with its premise that she was diminished, that she was less, that the woman who had operated in the world Lucian Moretti occupied was gone, and the woman with the limp in the scrubs was all that remained. Today had been many things. Among them it had been a correction. She stood up. Her right leg ached. Her shoulder ached, where she'd wrenched it against the corridor wall. She was hungry in a way that meant her blood sugar had been running on emergency reserves for hours. She was tired in the bone-deep, marrow-deep way that sleep would touch, because she had learned over 8 years that even the deepest tired was touchable if you gave it time. Rook stood up beside her. He looked at her face. She scratched behind his ear the spot, the one spot she'd always used, the spot she'd used when he was a puppy. She was training in a forward operating environment that had no business having a puppy in it, and somehow produced one anyway. The specific pressure in the specific place that made him exhale every time, like he was putting something down. Exhaled. She walked back inside. 3 months later, the building that had been the East Side Outpatient Clinic at 1140 Harbor Street was renovated. Not extravagantly, practically. The kind of renovation that serves function, rather than appearance-wide corridors for wheelchairs, adjustable equipment, consultation wing where assessment happened without reference to insurance status or service record, or the particular configuration of a person's history. The sign above the entrance said Vesper Rehabilitation Center in plain lettering on a gray background. No ceremony. No ribbon cutting. Mara had been specifically opposed to ribbon cutting. The first morning, she arrived at 6:15 with Rook and her coffee and the prosthetic specialist's chart for the day's first patient, and found a car parked at the far end of the lot that did not belong to any of her staff. She recognized it. She did not go to it. She went inside and began the work. At 9 that morning, between her second and third patient consultations, she looked through her office window, and the car was gone. She went back to work. The federal investigation into Lucian Moretti's organization generated 4 indictments in its first 6 months. Tomas Vale pled guilty to 17 charges, including conspiracy, weapons charges, and the hospital device. He was sentenced to 31 years. Feld received 8 years under a cooperation agreement. Renner received a suspended sentence and formal discharge, the judge noting in her ruling the specific circumstances under which he had provided critical information that prevented casualties. The Eastern contracts Vale had assembled were handed to federal prosecutors by Creed, acting on Lucien's instruction, 3 weeks after the hospital incident. The documentation produced a further 9 indictments across 3 connected organizations. Lucien's own cooperation with the federal process was managed through lawyers and produced an arrangement that was not immunity and was not full prosecution, and was the complicated middle ground of a man who had spent 30 years building something that was too intertwined with too many systems to simply excise without cost to people who hadn't chosen to be inside it. Mara read about it in the news sometimes. She did not comment on it. Nolan Rourke came to the Vesper Center 4 months after it opened, not as a patient. He stood at the entrance for a full 2 minutes before he came in, and she saw him through the window from the corridor and went out to meet him herself. He had called his sister. He had told her the real version. He had driven to their mother's grave on a Tuesday morning and sat there for 3 hours, and she did not know what he had said or not said during those 3 hours, but his face, when she looked at it now, was different from the face in the cafeteria not healed, because grief does not heal the way wounds heal, but differently weighted, carrying the right thing instead of the wrong one. I thought, he said, standing in her doorway, that maybe there was work here, if you needed anyone. She looked at him. Can you drive? She said. Yes. My transport volunteer canceled for this afternoon, she said. I have 3 patients who need rides to their specialist appointments and can't manage public transit. She held his gaze. It's not glamorous. That's all right, he said. It pays $12 an hour. That's also all right. She stepped back from the door. He came in. 6 months after the center opened, on a Thursday evening in late autumn, Lucien visited. He had called ahead, which she had not expected from him and which she respected. He came without Creed, without a security detail. In a dark sedan he drove himself, wearing a jacket that cost less than his usual suits and fit him slightly less precisely, which might have been deliberate. She met him in the courtyard. The center had a courtyard 2 better than the hospital's, because she had designed it deliberately, with actual consideration for what recovery looked like when it had room and light and a bench that had been chosen for comfort rather than institutional durability. He sat on the bench. Rook went to him immediately, and he put his hand on the dog's back, and the gesture was the same as it had been in the hospital courtyard 6 months ago, careful, uncertain of whether he deserved the contact. She sat on the bench beside him. The autumn light was going, the sky moving through orange into something darker. She had 4 more patients scheduled tomorrow morning, and a staffing meeting at 7, and a call with a prosthetics supplier at 11. She had a life full of the next morning's requirements, which was a thing she had not had for most of 8 years, and which she did not take lightly. Lucien looked at the center's back wall, where someone Marcus Webb, she suspected, though he denied it, had painted a mural, not elaborate, a mountain ridgeline in blues and grays, and below it something that could be a valley, or could be a city depending on how you looked at it. How's it going, he said. Simple. The question of a person trying to be ordinary. Good, she said. Hard good. He nodded. They sat in the courtyard, and the light to go, and the light continued, and Rook breathed between them, and she could feel the weight of everything that had happened between them, and the weight of everything that had not happened yet, and the weight of what it meant. 2 people who had survived the same catastrophe in different shapes and come out the other side into the same autumn evening. And she did not try to make it into anything other than what it was, which was enough, which was, after everything, more than enough. Rook rested his head against her hand. She let him. The light finished going. They stayed. Mara stayed in the courtyard until the cold made itself impossible to ignore. Not long after the light went 20 minutes, maybe 30. The kind of time that passes without counting, when the person beside you isn't requiring anything from you, and the dog between you has fallen into the deep, slow breathing of genuine sleep. Rook's paws twitched once. Whatever he was running in his dream, he was running it well. Lucien had not tried to fill the silence. That was the thing she had forgotten about him, or had remembered wrong. or had allowed the 12 years to erode into something less true than the original. She had remembered him as a man who commanded rooms, who occupied silence by replacing it with direction. What she had forgotten was that he could also simply be in a place, that he had, underneath all the machinery of his public self, the rare quality of a person who did not need to explain their own presence. She had loved that about him, once. She was careful, sitting in the autumn, dark, not to use the word, loved in even the interior version of her own thinking. It was too large for a Thursday evening, 6 months after a hospital bomb and a federal investigation and a courtyard bench. She used it anyway, briefly, and then filed it in the place where things go when they are true but not yet actionable. There's something I need to tell you, Lucen said. She waited. The building at 1140 Harbor Street, he said. Purchase. She turned to look at him. The East Side Clinic, he said. When you told me about it, I had Creed look into the property history. Previous owner had liens on it from a logistics company. A pause. The logistics company was one of Vale's. She was very still. Which means, he said, that the money used to purchase the building for the center, the money I gave you, effectively resolved a debt that had Vale's fingerprints on it. Not directly, through 3 removes. But the chain exists. She looked at the mural on the back wall, the mountain and the valley. Does the federal investigation know? She said. I disclosed it, he said. Last week. The prosecutors have reviewed the chain. Their assessment is that the transaction is clean. Vale's connection was upstream, by enough removes that no taint transfers to the center. They've put it in writing. She exhaled. You could have told me that first, she said. I could have, he said. I wanted you to have the full version before the resolution. She looked at him. You've been doing that more, she said. Telling people the full version. I've been trying to, he said. It's slower. It's considerably more uncomfortable. He looked at his hands. The knuckles had healed. The old scar tissue from the mountain was still there. Always would be. The fingers that had never been properly reset. I'm not certain I'm good at it. Yet. You just told me something that could have made me shut this whole operation down, she said. Before you told me it was clean. That's a reasonable attempt. Something in his face relaxed fractionally. The prosecutor's letter is in the car, he said. I brought a copy. I'll get it before you leave, she said. They were quiet again. Rook had stopped twitching. His sleep had gone deeper, the full weight of his old body given over to the bench. How is Creed? She said, managing. Lucian's mouth moved slightly. Not quite a smile. He's decided the transition period is his personal logistical project. He's treating the federal cooperation process the same way he treated running security, which is systematically and with considerable force of personality. Does he blame himself for Renner? Yes. He'll carry that for a long time. A pause. Renner is doing community service. Youth outreach, actually. Courts placement. Creed checks on him. She had not known that. She absorbed it. And Vale, she said, prison, Lucian said. Flat. He appealed the sentencing. The appeal was denied last month. He looked at the courtyard wall. I went to see him. She looked at him. Once, he said. 2 months ago. I needed to. He stopped. Considered. I needed to finish the conversation. The one in the interview room. I needed to say the things I didn't say then, because you were counting down from 7 minutes, and I was trying not to hit him again. What did you say? That he was right, Lucian said. That I invented the framework. That I spent 30 years making decisions that treated people as arithmetic, and then was shocked when someone who'd learned that arithmetic from me applied it to me. He was looking at his hands again. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me. And I understood that the point of going wasn't to hear anything back. Point was to say it out loud to the person it was true about. Mara thought about that. That took courage, she said. Took about 40 minutes. And a 2-hour drive, he said. I'm not sure that's courage. 40 minutes of saying, the hardest thing you know is true to the person most qualified to use it against you, she said. That's courage. The drive is just driving. He looked at her. The expression she had no word for. She was getting closer to a word for it. She was not going to use it tonight. The organization, she said. Where does it stand? Smaller, he said. Significantly smaller than it was 6 months ago. Some of that is the federal process. Some of it is what happens when the architecture of a thing gets examined. Honestly, you find the parts that were only held together by the refusal to look at them. He paused. The freight operations are being sold to a legitimate logistics consortium. Port access contracts are being restructured through the Maritime Authority. What remains is, he looked for the word less. Less dangerous, she said. Less of everything, he said, including dangerous. She nodded slowly. Is that bearable? She said. He looked at her with something almost like surprise. It was not a question anyone had asked him. She could tell. Everyone in his world either wanted the organization to be what it was or wanted it to be gone entirely. Nobody had asked him whether losing it peace, by careful peace, was something a person could stand. Some days, he said honestly. That's the right answer, she said. Rook woke up. He lifted his head, looked at the courtyard, determined that nothing had changed, and put his head back down on Mara's knee with the decisive finality of an animal exercising executive judgment. Lucian watched him. He's slower, he said, than he was 6 months ago. He's 14, she said. He's allowed. How long? He stopped. I don't know, she said. The vet says his joints are arthritic, and his heart has a murmur they're monitoring. He's comfortable. He's not in pain. She looked down at the gray muzzle on her knee, found what he was looking for. Dogs don't need much beyond that. A long quiet settled between them. It was different from the other quiets of the evening. Those had been the quiet of two people establishing that they could share space without it, becoming something. Neither of them was ready. This quiet was the quiet of two people who have arrived, without announcing it, at the real conversation. The one that had been waiting since the cafeteria, since the mountain, since before the mountain, if she was honest, which she was trying to be. I don't know what this is, she said. What we are. No, he said. Neither do I. I'm not the person I was, she said. And I'm not entirely this person. Spin yet. I'm somewhere in the middle of something I started 8 years ago and haven't finished. I know, he said. And you are. She looked at him. You are a man in the middle of dismantling 30 years of yourself, which is not a small thing to be in the middle of. No, he said. It isn't. So we are two people in the middle of different things, she said. And I think that's what's honest. He held her gaze. I'll take honest, he said. The same words from 6 months ago. The same register. He meant them the same way, or more. You should probably get the letter from the car, she said. Before it gets later. He stood. He stood the way. He always stood that quality of unhurried authority. But something was different in it now. She had been trying to identify what was different for the past 2 hours, and she had it, finally. He stood like a man who was taking up his own space rather than claiming it. The difference was internal. The difference was everything. Crossed the courtyard and went around the side of the building toward the lot, and she listened to his footsteps go. She looked at Rook. You picked well, she told him. The dog's tail moved once, then settled. She thought about what tomorrow held. The 7 o'clock staffing meeting. The prosthetics call. The 3 morning consultations, one of which was a 22-year-old former Marine who had not spoken above a whisper in 6 months, and had, last Tuesday, asked her a question at full volume, and then looked startled by his own voice, as though he'd forgotten he had one. She had not made anything of it in the moment. She had just answered the question and moved on and let the moment belong to him rather than to her professional satisfaction with it. That was the work. That was what 8 years had built toward, without her knowing it was building toward anything, the specific skill of being present in someone else's turning point, without making it about your own. She heard Lucian's footsteps coming back, thought about the rehabilitation center and what it was becoming, and the staffing she still needed, and the grant application she was 3 weeks behind on, and the East Wing expansion she had drawn preliminary plans for on a legal pad at 2 a.m. last week. Thought about Nolan Rourke driving 3 of her patients to their specialist appointments this afternoon, and the way he had come back and found her in the corridor, and reported on each patient's appointment status with the careful thoroughness of a person who had decided that thoroughness was what he had to offer and was offering all of it. She thought about the mountain, about the 7 pieces of shrapnel, 6 removed and 1 left because of where it was and what it was near, about dragging a man behind cover while his enemies moved through the dark below them, about the dog she had trained from a puppy and left behind because leaving was the only surgery available for the life she needed to stop living. She thought about Sloane, who had lost his position at Dunmore, After 7 separate staff members submitted formal accounts of behavior that had apparently been ongoing for 11 years. She had not submitted one herself. She had not needed to. When the door opens, what was behind it doesn't require your particular testimony to be visible. She did not feel triumphant about Sloane either. She mostly felt tired on behalf of everyone who had needed the door to open 11 years earlier. Lucian came back through the courtyard gate with an envelope. He held it out. She took it. She did not open it. She would read it tomorrow, with her lawyer, in the daylight, with coffee. Tonight she set it on the bench beside her. He looked at her. She looked at him. "Stay for a few more minutes," she said. Not an invitation to anything larger. Not a door. Just a few minutes in a courtyard in autumn, with a sleeping dog and an envelope, and the mountain behind them, and tomorrow ahead of them, and the specific, ordinary, extraordinary fact of being alive on the other side of the worst day this building had ever had. He sat back down. Rook breathed. The courtyard held them. And Mara Vesper, who had spent 8 years learning to take up less space, sat in the center of everything she had built and felt, for the first time, in longer than she could accurately measure, exactly the right size.